All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, guys. So welcome to the final community conversation of the fall. My name is Dylan Edgel, and I'm with the Center for Community and Economic Development, and along with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission's Community Development Division, the ASU Delta Center, and Entergy Arkansas, we created this webinar series called Community Conversations. We have a website for all the previous webinars, and today, we're going to hear from Thrive, and they're going to talk a little bit about website audits and how you can make your website more effective and attractive. And we're really excited to have them here. Thrive is a design firm based out of Helena that does a lot with design and youth engagement, and they're an incredible partner for us, and we're really excited to highlight them today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Sarah Melby and Ryan Biles. So you guys can take it away.
Everyone, I attempted to change my name at one point to Sarah and Ryan, so it wasn't just me, but somewhere I failed. So this is Ryan. I'm Sarah.
Good afternoon.
I think we know a good number of you guys through different projects and webinars and stuff, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Adjust it real quick. So like Dylan said, we both work at Thrive in Helena, Arkansas. We're a nonprofit design firm. And I just recently had this epiphany that people might really have a lot of confusion about what that means, and that we don't pay for like printing things was what somebody asked me recently. And I thought, no, why would they think that? And then realized nonprofit design firm is kind of an odd thing. So we're a nonprofit design firm in that we do design and branding projects for clients, as any for-profit firm would do, but we have a nonprofit side in which we do community development. So with that nonprofit side and for-profit side, our vision is that all communities will have access to the joy and vibrance of good design. And we refer to design in a really broad context within Thrive. And that context includes placemaking, public art, architecture, and graphic design, and other design. So we are a staff of 2 graphic designers, myself and Will Staley, and 1 architect, Ryan. And because of that, and we went into that because we care a lot about the human experience and making that experience better however we can. So that's a huge basis of everything we do at Thrive, is human experience and human-centered design, which we'll talk about even a little bit more later. So we work towards that vision through our mission by empowering rural communities to thrive through good design and youth engagement. So that is where our 2 sectors are shown that we often overlap with, is that we create branding and design for clients. We operate art and design workshops for local high school students. So, and when we say good design, we know that can be subjective and can seem like kind of an odd, like, of course you should be doing good design. But in this context, we like to see that good design means that it promotes community and it's considered input from the entire community rather than just a few people at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think a key to making sure that any design process is effective is doing exactly what you're talking about, Sarah. It's making sure that the table is set so that participation can be maximized from a really broad and diverse cross-section from your community. So we have 3 major goals here. And goal 1 for us is guiding rural cities, mostly rural, oftentimes rural cities here in Arkansas and throughout the region, and different organizations who may be working towards some type of community development goal and objective to help them and assist in economic revitalization efforts. So oftentimes that comes through branding, design, and consultancy initiatives to attract new residents, other industry. Here locally, we're improving livability for our neighbors here in Helena, West Helena, creating outdoor public art recreational improvements. So the way we feel like we can improve and can contribute to that overall community development here in Phillips County is really focusing on coming alongside those who are already doing great work without duplicating those local efforts. So we address those goals oftentimes and primarily through our after-school services that we work on. that really affects the next generation of leaders in the community.
Yeah, for sure.
So that aspect of what we do is fueled by the professional services that we provide as a full service graphic design and branding consultancy studio. So again, Sarah mentioned we have an integrated design approach. We do branding and design, and we do youth programming. We're branding for small businesses, what we would say small businesses that are having a high impact in their community. So we've had the opportunity to work with people who are making an investment in the revitalization of their downtowns, the core of their community, or who are major contributors to a revitalization effort. Chambers of commerce, economic development entities, school districts oftentimes are major players in the revitalization of their community, and cities and municipalities themselves, both at the city level or sometimes from a foundational level volunteer. There's a number of ways that we can do. All of you are very well aware of the programming that Dylan and Shelby and their department does at CDI and the Center for Community and Economic Development. Many times our clients are folks just like y'all who have gone through that and have a vision, and now they're ready to articulate that vision with deliverables that contribute to that branding. So it's a process, as design is. It's not a product, but that process is a lot of fun. It's something we enjoy doing, and particularly on the stakeholder engagement side, where you're bringing in your stakeholders in the community. We do a day long or a daytime workshop or an evening time workshop. It's usually about 2 or 3 hours. We go through a process of brand discovery. We iterate that, create a creative brief that guides that iterative process, come up with the final version of the primary visual elements, and then expand upon that in terms of what objectives you have. And oftentimes that's tangible deliverables like the things that you're handing out in physical form, your letterhead, your business cards, and that sort of thing. And what we'll get into more today, it's your website. And that's a lot of times what people start with. But what they realize is we start much earlier than that. We do begin with the end in mind, but it's a fun process to get there.
Yeah, it is. As we do these stakeholder workshops, it's always really fun to see people kind of ideating and thinking about these things, and these light bulbs are coming on, and everyone's, really thinking about like, how do people see our community, and how do we want to be seen? And that all feeds into the entire process. And then that brand expansion, including the website, is a great place to make sure that that's fully utilized.
Sometimes you saying that makes me think sometimes these workshops really have a capability of bringing together folks who aren't normally in the same room together. And it gives you as the organizer the ability to bring in an objective third party who is able to discuss certain things that you as the leader of the group or as the leader of a coalition may not always be able to be the one to bring up. But when we do it as a collaborative team, and then kind of with the spirit and the tone that we bring to the workshop, people can feel free to say things that we wanted them to say, but they often are too reserved to express. And what's fun about that is it can really be a unifying moment that helps bring in all of these different collaborative groups in your community.
Yeah. So that second part of what we do is really kind of tunneled down to what we'll talk about here for just a minute, is the civic workshops that we operate as part of the creative leadership program. So we work with high schoolers, sometimes 7th and 8th graders, for 1 week each month out of the school year. And we use that week to create community enhancement projects. And those projects can look like a very broad scale of things. And additionally, there are sometimes some art and design workshops. But featured here are 3 public art workshops that we did that we enhanced the built environment in Helena, either a blighted corner or just added some color and beauty. And then in the process, the students are developing design fundamentals, craftsmanship, painting skills, all job transferable skills. And then we have occasionally things like a screenwriting workshop we did recently with Arkansas Cinema Society. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about our programs, we love to talk about it. We love our students, and feel free to reach out to us. But we will jump in now to our website audit. So we wanted to give you guys a good background on us so that you can kind of understand where we're coming from, the context that we work within, and that gives us some insight to websites and the audits that we've done, so that you realize where this is coming from. But you might be thinking, an audit is a kind of a scary word sometimes, especially in certain associations like taxes. And so we don't want this to seem like a daunting thing.
It might seem like a website checkup, you know, just
a check,
just a status check, right?
So you may have a website, you might not, and this can apply to you even if you don't currently have a website and you're looking to start from scratch. But say you have a website and for some reason it's not effective. Either it's not pulling the full audience that it needs to, you're embarrassed to share it with people because you don't like the way it looks, or it doesn't fully function well, it doesn't accomplish what it needs to when people actually visit. Or maybe you really are starting from scratch and you need a site for the first time and you're not sure where to start. So we're going to walk through some of these steps and try to keep it as concise and manageable as possible, but give you a very thorough look at how you can kind of reassess what you have or start. And these steps can be applied, years in or at the very beginning, like I said. So the first 4 major things that you'll think about. Number 1 is one that everyone's going to have kind of a gut reaction to. Is it well designed? You know, you might get into the nitty gritty of like what typeface this and what typeface that. But the first thing is, does it look nice? Do people want to spend more time there? Or are they stressed just looking at it because they can't find what they're looking for, or there's too much happening? Is it implementing your brand? Now, a lot of the times when you're talking about this, we'd like to implement a brand, but we don't really have a community brand. This is a really good time for some people to assess, is it time to create a fully branded community, or do we have a brand that just is being underutilized? You also want to implement your brand effectively and not overstretch it. And we'll get into that in a little bit more in a minute. But again, is it accomplishing your needs? A lot of the times a website isn't doing that. And without accomplishing what you need it to, it's not serving you and you're missing a huge opportunity. And is it accessible for everyone? This is a really, really broad way of saying, is it accessible to each and every person that's searching for it? Can you find it on the web? Is it searchable? And when you get there, is it navigable? And we'll get into how those things work.
It's essentially an approach that removes barriers to the ability for people to get the information they need to understand from you.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that's a physical barrier. Other times it's just a matter of the way that you've organized the information.
Yep.
So we're talking about things in somewhat of a subjective way, but there is a truth to the fact that sometimes things just don't look good, and it when you see it. Yep. Kind of, and you probably understand that. We're all consumers of content on the web and on whether it's on a desktop or on your device. And in that regard, what a good website looks like. And you're generally aware of when you feel like yours doesn't look that great. So the way to kind of remove that subjectivity from your process, other than to have an initial gut feel to realize that a change may need to happen, is to hire a professional. Hire someone who has been trained, again, in design, because we're talking about elements here: balance and scale, color, contrast, and the way that things are composed on the screen, both originally and in the original website, and how they adapt depending on platform to different modes of viewing the site. So making your website visually appealing and clear starts with hiring a professional. Secondly, and we'll say it again, is the application of your brand. So what we would say is, really, if you don't have a brand to put to apply to the site and to weave throughout the site in terms of a consistent message, then you really need to step back a few steps and say, evaluate not just your web presence, but also evaluate what is our message, and what do we stand for? And ultimately, this is not necessarily the place to put all of that information there, but it is a place to, and here's the third thing, be concise. Make it really clear what you're about, so that I want to learn more about what you're about, and I begin to spend more time on the site to get to the depth that you've got in your mission and your purpose.
And these internal audits, although sometimes not formalized, happen a lot. And this right here is an example of a result of an internal audit. This is something we did for the King Foundation out of Dallas. And on the left, there's nothing about this that screams, this is a horrible site and it's not going to do what you need it to. But in evaluating how their audience was interacting with it and the message it was sending, and what people saw as a first impression, they realized they needed to revamp a little bit. So on the right, you'll see that the first thing that should hit you is that it visually all looks cohesive, and it all is promoting the exact same brand versus potentially a confusing, not as cohesive thing. I won't walk you through the whole website, so you can't see all that. But the main thing was trying to make it more navigable for the people who were using it, which was their grant, the people they were funding, the recipients of their grants. So as we walked through that process, we thought about them over and over and over again. So this is just to say, people do this all the time, and they might arrive, at hiring somebody and saying, we don't know where to start. Or they might come to somebody with, we already know exactly what's wrong, and now here's what we need to do.
Interesting here that there was a sensitivity to making sure that the audience was served well, that their constituents were served well. You may begin with a different objective, but they had a clarity behind why they were taking on the project in the first place. And so that lent clarity to the final result, which was the ability for their constituents to find information faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of to hone in on that appeal and clarity, again, integrating community brand. We're going to talk about this over and over and over again. And again, it's a great opportunity to consider a refresh. If you have a brand and it's being underutilized, it's time to put it there. If you don't have a brand, it's a great time to actually get one made and really consider how you want your community to be represented visually.
Yeah.
Good photography is a must. Now, if you don't have the budget or you're not sure you really want to lead with photography, that's okay. You just don't want to have a photography heavy website, because when you have huge hero banner images that are poor quality, that's the first impression somebody has of you and your community.
Yeah,
So
it feels unfinished.
It does.
And it feels like there wasn't a high level of quality placed on the most visually impacting element of it, even though the website could be really great in terms of operation.
Absolutely.
So if you're going to rely on it as the organizing element, it's got to be really good.
It needs to be really, really good. Yeah. And there are incredible photographers in Arkansas. If any of you are looking for some, we have people in mind. We work with a lot of photographers, but we know that bad photography can really kill a site.
Yeah.
And then to reiterate, make it clean and clear. It needs to be concise. You do not have to put everything on the homepage. People do not need to know absolutely everything in 1 second. They just need to know that they're in the right place and that they can find the information they need by looking around.
So Sarah, you showed the King Foundation. Another example was in my community of Lone Oak, Thrive designed the branding back about 4 years ago as a result of working with CDI and UCA on the Kickstart program. And then that branding process resulted then, of course, in the need for a new website. And when that was finally rolled out in its form, really this year or earlier this year, as Sarah built out the site, there's ways to really reinforce what is that essential message that the community wanted to make sure was expressed. But it sounds kind of funny because it's a municipality. That's not the primary reason that people come to a city's website. However, it was there. And the message of cultivating community, which is the tagline that was developed by the branding process, is prominently featured both in the visual identity and in the base of the site. So it was a subtle thing that reinforced that process that citizens had engaged to create.
Absolutely. So the next big thing is, does it accomplish what you need it to? So again, when given the opportunity, a website can do a ton of work for you. And beyond just offering a place to find essential info, websites can act as the first impression offered about your community. If you have a dream of what you want your website to be able to do, 99% chances that it's doable. You just have to find the right person and think it through. If it's not accomplishing everything you dream of, it's time to assess how it can. So the first thing to consider is your purpose. Are you working on attracting visitors, or are you communicating vital info? Now, almost all websites should be able to do both, and they should be able to do them both well.
Right.
It might be more heavily aimed at attracting visitors or more heavily aimed at communicating vital info, but they should work together. So we do this a lot with our clients as we are working with the city and they have a separate tourism entity. They might not want to share a website, which makes sense. They have very different specific goals, but they should work together. So if you have a city site and a tourism site, they should be communicating the same message. They should be linked together. And it's a great opportunity for partnership.
That's right.
At best, an integration is a really good way to go, where your sites have a shared brand even, or they even, at the very least, make sure they're connected. In Helena, we have a very shared visual identity for both of them, and then they link back and forth to each other. So you might not want to redo everything that the tourism site has done on a city site, but you have somewhere where it says, if you're a visitor, this is where you go to find visitor information.
Yeah.
And on the visitor site, it's, if you're a resident, it might not be worded exactly like that, but definitely partnered with the two of them.
Yeah. And so that essential part is still there. Attract and communicate. In the case of a city, you're trying to attract new residents. You're trying to say to people who are viewing you on the web that these people who are putting this site together are ready to welcome you to their town or to their community as a potential resident, versus a tourism oriented, which is to say, we're welcoming y'all to come and spend your money here. But in both cases, it has to be attractive, and having a clarity of purpose is a key piece there. This is probably one of my favorite parts, is the clarity of message, right? So we talked about purpose, and it's not all words, but words help in terms of generating that clarity. It's certainly the visual aspect. Is there continuity, like Sarah was mentioning, between other partnering organizations or entities? Do you clearly communicate the first thing that you want them to know about you when you get to that site? Is that conveyed? And if your main goal, again, is to attract tourists, then your main message is going to be slightly different, because residents are going to want to know something like, what day is my trash going to get picked up? Or who is my alderman? Or when elections are held? But regardless, when you understand that and you've got a clarity in your mind, that clarity will convey to your audience, versus if it's confusing in your mind, that confusion will also reverberate and it just will not, of course, resonate with your audience. So it's more than wording as well. It's a combination of really assembling all of that messaging with the concise message.
Absolutely. Does it function well? This gets into the nitty gritty of, is it hard or easy to find? Now, SEO, if you've never heard of it, or if you have, it's search engine optimization. And it sounds extremely daunting. And a lot of times it sounds very complicated. And I think it used to be, but thankfully there's been a lot of development in that area. And SEO is one of the most important things you can think about. I won't deep dive into what it all looks like, but the main thing to think about is you want to have somebody who knows what they're doing as far as SEO. The main thing you want people to be able to do is Google you and you be one of the first people that shows up. Now, you can't always hit above the people who create ads, but you want to be the site that when somebody searches Helena, Arkansas, it's the first one that comes up. we struggle with this a lot because there are a lot of things that come up when people search Helena. And it's a long game. It is. It's not going to overnight all of a sudden be
Right.
The first thing that pops up. But there are things you can do to make it better and better and more visible each time.
And, this causes me to think, when you do a branding exercise, you are going through the question of what makes us unique. And if you've been involved or around the CDI community for any length of time, you know that we're talking about an asset-based approach. So when you evaluate those things as part of what is our community story that we want to tell through a brand, you're already beginning to think, okay, what is that catch? What is that thing that says you have to come to Lone Oak because of this, or the reason why we're special is this? And then that carries on through the design process, through the branding process. Ultimately, having a clarity there helps you on SEO because we're the ones who do this, or sometimes we're the only ones who do this. And you're going to find us because our branding is integrated and now into the messaging of the website.
Right.
It's just
and we
super,
highlight those things that
it's
are
like
going
a
to pop up.
Yeah, like a self-filtering kind of process.
Absolutely. So most templates have SEO built in. We'll get into kind of some of the different platforms you can use in a little bit. But the main thing to think about is making sure that whoever you're working with knows what they're doing and will work on that to make sure your site is showing up. Do the intended functions work? If I go click on a link and a button and it doesn't work, that's not effective, and you're losing your audience as they try to look at something and it doesn't come up. If I have a trash pickup route that won't actually open, I can't figure out when my trash pickup is, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And is it adaptive? Adaptive is something that people really had to focus on a long time ago. Thankfully, it's mostly integrated within whatever platform you use, but it needs to be able to respond to mobile. You can't have an effective site without people being able to look at a mobile version and understand what's going on.
Right.
We live in an extremely mobile world, and I think if we were to really do the research, probably the majority of people look at websites on their phone versus a computer now.
Yeah.
And so your site needs to be able to do that. Again, comes into who you hire and what platform you go with. And the platforms we use are automatically responsive to that. And so for the most part, it works really well, but it's just something to always have in mind.
Point to be made, there's gone are the days when you have to be completely custom to get that type of functionality.
Absolutely.
Though.
Yeah. Understanding your audience. Understanding your audience is a huge thing. It goes back to at the very beginning, us talking about our vision and how human-centered we always try to be, and what drives what we do at Thrive. This is a small example of something that I had a little bit of an awe moment recently where I work with a local concert series, and the website that I did not build has this little thing as the menu. And we had calls upon calls of elderly people saying, I can't get anywhere past the homepage because I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
And realizing that this little hamburger that to some people is obviously a menu is not obvious to everyone.
Right.
So that's an instance of clearly didn't understand the audience when the site was built, and realizing that our main demographic of concert goers and people who are downloading tickets are over the age of 60 and probably have not seen the little hamburger icon as often, and that we should be thinking about them as we go.
Yeah. So understanding your audience is crucial to building an effective site. So we talk about human-centered design. That's really on our minds just throughout the process. And when we say that, it's basically how people are interacting with the creation. Where are the pain points? We talked about barriers before, understanding where those barriers exist. And then how can we provide solutions to removing barriers, to alleviating pain points, understanding, and then helping them get through those and resolving those. So sometimes you're trying to capture a really large audience that it's going to vary in how they operate. That's okay. So then we just need to think of, in one sense, kind of what is our lowest common denominator, or our lowest threshold to make sure that people can access and cross. You really want to think about the user that will have the most difficulty and then how they're going to interact. And again, this can be both physical, it can be visual, it can be any number of things. And again, it's kind of the same principle of not really having an understanding of how sidewalks, the condition a sidewalk is in, until you have a baby stroller and you can't get over a curb, or you realize that this ramp is broken. And then a person who is using a baby stroller now all of a sudden has a lot of empathy for a person who uses a wheelchair, because they're realizing this is not navigable. I can't get from point A to point B without a tremendous amount of effort or entering a roadway. And so that's a kind of a highly visual example to say that websites, they have a path as well. And if they have obstacles and broken points, then, we need to be putting ourselves in the shoes of the person who's going to be using it and creating a simple of a path that you can make while still being thorough in how much information you're providing them.
Better you understand your audience, the better the site you can make and the better results you'll have as your audience views.
And I would venture to think that a lot of the folks on the site, that is their job or their orientation, is certainly to be thinking about the people that they serve. So take that lens that you're used to thinking of your constituents with and apply that to your web presence and your how that site works.
Absolutely. So again, thinking of users, accessibility is a huge part of that. It is something that's becoming a lot more streamlined, same with the adaptiveness of mobile, but it's becoming more easy to accomplish within the platforms that are available. But it's something that especially municipalities have to really consider in being ADA compliant. So is your site easy to find? That's just a general, again, SEO. Is it coming up when people are looking for it? Do you have a really hard to remember domain name? It might be time to consider reassessing your domain and maybe buying a different one. We joke all the time about the domain in Helena and how potentially hard it is, but we didn't have very much of a choice. But also for those of you who are municipalities, you can get free.gov domains managed by the state. Just a little tip there.
Yeah, that can be helpful.
For those of you doing that. But your domain name should be easy to tell people and them not have to think, wait, was there a number in there? Was it .us.com?
Yeah.
All of those things go into making it hard for people to find your site.
Memorable is portable.
If text is high contrast, I ran into this in the past of trying to go with a really trendy light gray and people constantly saying, I can't read the website. It's not high contrast enough for me. My eyesight is a little diminished and I can't read it. It's not helpful. And at that point, I'm failing my entire audience when the majority of them can't read it. So that's a really simple one, but all of your text, your images, your headings, navigation, they need to be high contrast. And if they aren't, again, losing your audience. And is it easily navigable? Your navigation is key. You do not need all of your pages to show up on a top menu bar. What you need is for it to make enough sense that you understand that, oh, my elected officials are going to be under the government tab. Okay, so I just need government. I don't need government and elected officials and city council minutes all to be their own menu item. As long as it makes sense and it is easily thought through as a user, that makes it easily navigable. And that is the best way you can serve your audience.
Some things you might have seen, and I know that Sarah, you design sites for cities that do this often, is the most accessed points are right there at the top, because the objective of a city website is much different than, say, an e-commerce site or a content delivery site, where their objective, A, of course, they have to know their audience, but B, they want their audience to spend as much time on the website as possible. And there's it's the flip on a city. I want my constituent to spend as least time on my site as possible. I want them to know where to go, where to find it, access it, and get to it. So pay your water bill. It's usually right there at the top, because that's one of those customer facing or constituent facing services that people are most often trying to get to.
Yeah. And it doesn't hurt to have the same information in multiple places.
Right.
While you don't want to overload with and be redundant, you also want people to be able to find it if they're scrolling potentially down the homepage or they're on another page. A footer is a great place to put things like that, a contact information, address, the kind of thing that they could find on every single page if they were looking for it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You've completed your audit. You've looked at these things. You've talked about visual appeal and clarity. You've figured out what it is you're trying to accomplish. You've got a greater understanding of accessibility. At this point, you've got some work to do. So where do you start, right? So what, again, we mentioned before, you want to hire a professional because your time is valuable and you have things that you have to be doing to serve the people that that your mission is driving you towards. So do you hire a web developer or do you hire a graphic designer or a branding consultant? What we would say is both. So there is a difference. And if you've been with us on some other webinars that we've done, Will Staley has a great webinar that he did with the conductor last year when we talked with small business owners, just about the right sequence as you begin to expand and reach your audience. Who do you need? What players do you need at the table? And it's not, do I need a lawyer or a CPA? It's, I need both as I'm expanding, right? And so what we would say is a marketing agency does not necessarily have graphic design at their center. And a branding consultancy is going to be thinking of things holistically, but may not be drilling down into the, I would say, the nuts and bolts of the SEO, for example, though they will provide guiding vision for what your SEO should be targeting and maybe what your strategic objective should be. Marketing oftentimes is more of a maintenance type relationship or an ongoing campaign that executes or carries out elements, builds upon elements that are created during your branding consultancy process. So basically, web developers are not necessarily graphic designers, and designers are not necessarily great at building custom websites. However, your branding consultant will have the ability to help you understand how all these relate, which roles have certain prominence at certain stages, and give you guidance on understanding what type of agency or firm that you need to hire.
Absolutely. Understanding your needs is really clear and needed. And sometimes you'll find that unicorn that is a web developer and designer in one. But in any instance, we really recommend having a presence of both.
Yeah, build a team of professionals around you.
You might be thinking like, I don't even know where to start building.
Or I just thought of this too. Some people may have built websites about 10 years ago and remember what a painful process that was
horrible.
Right? Like it takes forever and it's hard to understand. And then you get these like static versions of the site to kind of test drive, but nothing really works. And so it's like, how's that going to be in real life? Having been involved in that over 15 or so years, it's like, man, it used to be so hard.
Yeah.
It's a lot different now.
Yeah. And to make any changes, you had to contact either your developer or have a lot of knowledge yourself.
Right.
That was a really rough time. And thankfully we are not there anymore. Yeah. But understanding your needs is really important because obviously the city of Fayetteville and the city of Helena, West Helena do not have the same scale needs and thus are able to use different platforms. Also considering your budget. If you have a large enough budget to do absolutely everything that you dream of, that's incredible and you should do it. If you don't, there are options and things that you can do and still do them well, even on a budget. So here are just our top platform options that we usually talk to clients about. Now, Squarespace, there are multiple things like Squarespace, so it's not the only one by any means in its category, but Squarespace is going to be a template build website. It is you start with a template, you can customize your template to an extent, but it does all of the back end stuff for you. So it does some automatic SEO for you. It does the coding needed to include your logo on every page. And you get to log in and change things whenever you want. It's a monthly subscription, which sometimes is something people consider, but is very cost effective.
Yeah.
And the best thing about it is that you can change as you go.
Yeah.
It's personally our favorite, and it's what we recommend for our clients. And it's what we build the most often.
For the great majority, particularly in a rural setting, in smaller communities or smaller nonprofits, chambers of commerce, it is way, way, way more than adequate to address all the needs you could possibly need. But as Sarah said, that scale varies, and your community may be large enough that you need additional functionality that requires something a little more robust.
Absolutely. So Fayetteville, as an example, uses Civic Plus. Civic Plus has a lot that Squarespace cannot offer. It has a lot of integration in using personnel management and integrating maps. I mean, there's so much to Civic Plus.
Different login pages.
Yeah, you can have a login for certain users. That is definitely something for larger cities that they need. I wouldn't think most rural cities need it.
Yeah.
But if you are in a situation where you want something more extensive, Civic Plus is a great way to go.
I would say too, Civic Plus would be an example of a true, they do one thing well, and that's websites for cities.
Absolutely.
But branding is not what they do. And they're not concerned with that, which is to say you supply that to them and they integrate that in. And that happens oftentimes with some of our clients as well. We develop branding and give them the tools that work with their Civic Plus representative to get that plugged in. Everything from primary visual identity, that is your logo, to typeface, colorway, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And then WordPress can be, some of you might be thinking of WordPress, the kind of blog platform, but WordPress has a whole other set where you can do completely custom coded from scratch websites. That is another one of those very intensive, incredibly custom. So you get exactly what you're looking for. Your designer and your web developer have a full range of what you want to accomplish and the freedom to do that. And there is adaptability as you're updating things as you go, but it's a much larger, more thorough process. So just understanding what you as a community need is the most important thing here, and looking through your options. And if any of you have questions about those kinds of options, let us know, and we're happy to go a little more in depth into that. So getting it done, you've come up with all of these things. Now time to actually hit the road and get going with it. So the biggest thing is to make the best decisions for your community. It's going to change from community to community, from business to business. It's always going to look a little different. And you understand your community better than anyone else outside of your community. So advocating for what is going to be best for you is extremely important. And then who should lead? This is something that we think is so important.
Very critical.
We love having a committee of people who have worked hard to think this through, who have been through the branding process, who are all lending a voice. But when it comes down to executing the website, you need one point of contact to be that person. Because
remember, all of the decisions about the look and feel and the how have really already been done. You focus group those through the branding design process. Now it's time to have someone whose job, or at least in their job description, is being the air traffic controller for all of this information that's necessary to populate the site.
Absolutely. So gathering everything from contact information for the mayor's office to, again, the trash pickup route spreadsheet. However that goes, that one point of contact should be the main person communicating with the designers and developers to make sure that all gets done.
Right.
So with that.
Yeah, so that's our approach to assessing and evaluating your site. Would love to hear, a little bit more about what questions you might have. Of course, you can tell that we're very passionate about partnering with communities and organizations, chambers and schools on branding, and of course, our placemaking projects that we love to do so much, because these are high impact for the communities that we love and serve in the region. So of course, if you can help us, reach out to us. That's our information there on the screen. And then also, Sarah, just because we're here and we have an audience here, we have an opportunity that's pretty cool that we're sharing with others as well.
Yeah, so we're hiring a program coordinator. if you're interested,
Yeah.
share it, apply.
It's right on the home
Etc.
page of our website, which is thrivecenter.org. And or you can take your phone out and snap the QR code.
Like 10 more seconds.
Yeah. So
thanks guys for listening. We'll go ahead and stop so we can get into some questions.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. That was super informative. And yeah, we can open this up to questions. It looks like Emily has her hand raised. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I had a question. I was just curious, like, do you guys maintain your clients' SEO on their website and their content?
It depends on the client. We have had some people who wanted to keep an ongoing contract with us to manage that. But we know that for a lot of our clients, that's a budget constraint. And so we try our best at the front end to really set them up for success after we take a step back. And so I usually do some training sessions with them.
Right. That's cool.
SEO is a lot of the time something that can stay pretty similar for quite a while. And once it's done, it's done.
Yeah.
There are some improvements you can make over time. But yeah, sometimes we do that for clients. It just depends on what they want.
Well, and Emily, it kind of comes to mind that most clients are probably trying to set it and forget it. Like once this process is over, we're done and we don't want to worry about it anymore. And that's understandable. Some may necessarily have a more dynamic approach to how they manage their site, or that primary point of contact, like we talked about, may care very much about tracking metrics, in which case they will have access to those. And again, Sarah does kind of an owner handoff where here's how you do this, but also if you ever need us, be sure and call us, kind of thing. So
that's really cool.
I have a question. It's my turn on camera.
yeah.
I participated. This was something really interesting. I just want to get your perspective on it. But the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis redid their website, and some of our partners there shared some contact information of their partners, which included me. And so a design agency like pulled me in as part of a focus group on how I use their website. Have you guys ever done anything like that? Or would you suggest, like, for a community to maybe like, or organization, whoever, to like pick some folks to say, like, you know, walk them through, where would you, they asked me questions like, where would you go? Where do you think you would go to find this? Where do you think you would go to find this? And then I was like, I felt really judged, but I was like, oh, I don't know, you know, around on the website.
Yeah.
But it was a really cool experience, and I'd never done anything like that. So I was just curious, have you guys done something like that? Would you suggest an organization or community do that themselves, or do you think that's really should be handled by like a professional?
I think it again can depend, which I know is kind of frustrating to be like, it might not. We've had clients who have come to us. The majority of them don't have a site to begin with, and we're working from scratch. So that's a lot of, you know, pulling from those stakeholders.
Or it's pretty ancient.
Right. Where we might as well be starting from scratch. And then we have clients like the King Foundation that they had already done all of that research into what was wrong and what their users were having a problem with, and they brought that to us. I do think it's really important to really consider that, and if that means pulling other people into the process on the front end, that can be awesome. We do always think, you know, there's sometimes a few too many people on a design team, but that's where you start large and you get a ton of feedback, even if it's just people submitting a form saying, this is what I had a problem with. And you narrow it down to eventually that one person that's going to help get it done.
So Shelby, if I'm putting my community organizer hat on for just a second, I'm thinking back to the community surveys that are so key in the work that y'all do, whether you're doing in the past when the Kickstart program was active, or even, you know, as you're doing the new program, the community surveys always establish a baseline. And I would think that it would be a very smart process to not only well, I would say we're talking specifically about the website. So that's fairly easy to do with the Google form. And there's some template language that you can integrate and then kind of tweak to be community specific. But I think it's a really, really smart approach to take. The other thing I would say is if you're building a website as part of the rebranding process, pull those questions in either into the community workshop or as an outgrowth of the community workshop, the survey that we would facilitate as part of that. But I love the idea because the more feedback, the better. And doing it online, for example, is a great way to make sure that those voices can be heard and analyzed, but aren't necessarily all in the same room at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, professionals can know the best baselines to start with when it comes to things like that and navigation and how people are going to interact. But you guys know your community better,
right?
And can better, kind of gauge how that will work.
Right.
Yeah, and the way they did it was it was just kind of via Zoom. I shared my screen and she just asked me questions and watched where I went.
Wow.
And like, it was
nerve-wracking.
really
very intimidating.
I've never been a part of anything.
Are
like
you
that.
good at internet, basically?
Yeah, kind of too. Yeah, and then like, there were some things that were Fed specific that I was just like, I would never look that up, so I wouldn't have any idea where that would be.
Yeah, that's very judgy.
Yeah, she made a lot of like, okay. Like
real time feedback.
Yeah, real time feedback for me, and I was like, is that like a good ooh or is that a bad ooh?
How funny. That is interesting. That is really interesting.
Any other questions from the audience?
Any questions in the chat?
I didn't see any in the chat.
Okay.
I had one if no one else has one. So you talked about having like an integrated kind of brand and having different, I guess, sites kind of talk to each other, like the city, chamber, visitors bureau. Are there any good examples of that you guys have seen from communities maybe in Arkansas or outside of Arkansas?
Batesville, Arkansas would be the best example that we've worked, not even just that we've worked on, but that we've seen of them really taking a full scale approach to branding, really kind of the whole county. Their whole thing is experience independence. They're in Independence County. And from that brand was broken off into their Chamber of Commerce, their tourism brand, and their city has kind of adopted some of those things. But yeah, it definitely is. It's becoming more popular, but for a long time, I think they were some pretty separate things. But it's something we try really hard to encourage. And even with Magnolia that we did with you guys, and Van Buren ended up applying the brand to the Chamber of Commerce as we went.
It's something we always want to early on approach in the branding process, but we also understand and respect that there are certain assets and certain constituencies within those different contributing partners that sometimes they have to protect for whatever reason, we'll call it brand equity of their visual identity. Now, as long as there's a willingness to enter into that discussion, ultimately, if it comes down to it, that we don't all have the same, we'll say, colorway or look and feel or a shared, kind of cohesive visual element, that's okay. But we love it when that happens because ultimately, and this is pretty inevitable, when people think of, I'm going to use our community, when people think of Lone Oak, they're just going to look for it. And whichever one pops up, whether it's the city or the chamber or whatever it is, that's going to be what they use to get their initial impression of the community. So the more those things look alike, or I won't even say look alike, but look like they work together and they're singing from the same hymn book, so to speak, then the more impression of sophistication that'll give to the audience who's using the website. So we love to start with that premise. It doesn't always end there, but it's a great one to think about when you begin that process.
Absolutely. All right, last call for any questions. No. All right, if not, I guess that is the end of the webinar. Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Ryan. We really appreciate you guys donating your time to this webinar. And like they said, be on the lookout for Magnolia. Their new brand unveiling. I don't know when it's going to happen yet, but we did work with Thrive.
Is anybody from Magnolia? They're not on the call today. Oh, well, I mean, Shelby counts from being from Magnolia.
Yeah, she's from around there. Yeah.
We are so excited for y'all to see that. It's beautiful. It's just it's just fun. So yeah.
And before we get off, I did want to ask if you're able to turn on your camera so that we can get a group picture,
Right.
so that we can post on social. So I'm gonna
My
get-
hair is like stuck. I put my sunglasses up like this and I can't take it down because my hair is like, so it's just gonna be in the sun. It's just-
Yay.
Looks
Oh,
great.
Sarah finally changed our name. That's great.
There we go.
I did it.
And no
Awesome.
worries, Lisa. All right, here we go. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's it. Well, thank you guys so much again. I'll
Thanks,
save
everybody.
this recording after this, and we'll see you next time.
Bye,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thanks, y'all.